Empire of Macedon by Harold Lamb. We're in chapter 13, Persepolis. Four capital cities. Alexandros sent back word for them to come down in the defiles to receive this prescribed toll. Complacently, the tribal warriors thronged down toward the road to get their fee. They had no conception of what a Macedonian army in the field and in a hurry might do. The next sunrise, they awoke to find the Macedonian units posted along the road, while others were occupying the nearest Hussa villages, having encircled them by a night march. The confusion that ensued caused more panic than bloodshed. It ended with the Hussa perched on distant summits, with the remnants of their castle having received, as Arrian relates, these gifts of honor from Alexandros. At this point, the mother of Dariathoush, who had come to be a friendly counselor to the young Macedonian, interceded for the tribal folk and explained their psychology. Alexandros agreed to allow the Hussa to return to possession of their lands and to pay for that privilege a yearly tribute of 100 horses, 500 cattle, and 30,000 sheep. He had observed that the tribes had no money, nor did they till the land. So he asked for the animals and left the Hussa to wander ruefully how it had happened that instead of gaining money, they were forfeiting cattle to this demoniac great king. The Macedonians noticed that Alexandros was taking pains to restore order in this eastern limbo. After consulting with the guides from Susa and the chastened Hussa, he divided his forces, sending the baggage with Parmenio over the winding Regan road, and taking the better troops with him over a high, level trail that led straight towards Persepolis. The second stoppage was more serious, but again, the Macedonians had to get through in a hurry. It was Alexandros' column that met the obstacle. The trail they followed led through a narrow defile to the summit of a pass. This defile had been walled up and was defended in force. The Macedonians attacked the wall itself, made of rocks, roughly fitted together. They were thrown back the first day and went into camp to consider the situation. They'd taken a few prisoners. From these, they learned that a trail led over the mountains on the right to the river beyond the pass. Over this trail, Alexandros started with the Macedonians of the phalanx and the Agrianians and other picked units. With the prisoners as guides, they worked their way up at night and covered a distance of 12 miles. The camp in the valley had been left in command of the Craterus, a new leader whose persuasive magnetism made him a favorite with the men. Craterus, slender and elegant as a Corinthian, could get more miles out of a marching column than the others. He seldom gave orders, usually contenting himself with advice, smiling when he promised his command that no other brigade of Macedonians would earn so much glory as they. Alexandros did not object to this theatrical pose. Now he left only a small force with Craterus, believing that the Persians in the defile would not venture to attack the main Macedonian camp. High on the shoulders of the mountains, Alexandros' command had to wait out the day before they could move again without being seen by the Persians. At evening, they sent Philotas and Coenus with cavalry and and engineers ahead to rejoin the main route at the river and begin the construction of bridges across the river. They could see now on either side of them, above the cloud level, giant snow peaks, standing sentinel-like as if to mark an invisible gateway. The soldiers christened the one above them Olympus in Asia, and the pass itself the Persian gates. All in all, they believed the apparition to be a favorable omen, especially as the name of their chief guide turned out to be the wolf, and they remembered that it had been predicted that a wolf would lead Alexandros to success. When they worked their way down towards the pass, they did have success. They managed to capture or drive uphill 3 separate cordons of sentries without alarming the Persian camp below. Before full flight, they poured down in the rear of the camp when they sounded the trumpets. The signal agreed on with Kratras. The Macedonians in the valley attacked the wall. Outnumbered and attacked from the front and rear, the Persians broke out of the valley. When they ran into more Macedonians holding the river, they scattered in panic. The flight became terrible. Arrian relates, when men threw themselves over the cliffs, Alexandros marched on without the rest to the river, where the bridges were being finished. Without stopping at the river, he started the 45 miles of descent towards Persepolis, dropping down from the cliffs into dense forests and emerging upon fields of grain where the villages hugged the streams, pushing on with the cavalry. He came out on a plain as level as a temple floor, where slaves plowed the earth with buffalo. Against the hills at the edge of this garden valley, the Macedon At the edge of this garden valley, the Macedonians sighted the gleaming limestone of Persepolis. They had outstepped the news of their coming. Of the four Gaza Phylacta, the treasure cities of the great king, the Macedonians anticipated most from this, his innermost dwelling place. They ended their hard march down from the heights as if coming to the finish of a marathon. The best mounted of the companion horsemen streamed across the garden plain with scouts and archers straining to keep up with the wearied horses. They leaped water channels, cut through cherry orchards, rode the horses up the massive stone stairway to this hidden acropolis of the Persians. They raced in to secure the treasure of gold coin and gold leaf and purple dye and perfumes and solid plates of precious metal before the Persian officials could make off with the treasure. Half drunk with fatigue, muddled, laughing, joyous, they smashed through the fragments of immortals. The celebrated bowmen mustering at the stairhead. They pushed between the winged daemons of the Xerxes gate. Before the massive doors could be closed, they battered in the portals of the Hall of the 100 Columns, herding before them a frightened mob of servants. They scattered through places where gigantic wooden pillars supported roofs gleaming with solid silver plate. Like hunting hounds in a rabbit warren, they nosed through the palaces of Dariathaush, the small edifice of Xerxes. Realized, I'm not even sure if that's the right Greek spelling, but realizing that they had won the race and gained the mighty wealth of Persepolis intact, they drank heavily of the wine standing in porous jars in the cooling chambers. When torches were lighted and the wild surge penetrated the corners of this palace's height, the Apadana, or throne room of Xerxes, caught fire. The flames spread to the adjoining barrack and women's quarters. By the time the officers could organize firefighters, the Apadana was a blazing torch, the flames climbing the woven hangings and carved gilded woodwork. The silver plating melted, running down in streams, splattering through the embers. Alexandros, moving through the firefighters, saw where a stone slab bearing a likeness of Xerxes on the throne had been overturned. Abruptly he stopped, asking what it was. For a moment he studied it, while the men watched him, all of them conscious that this was the portrait of the great king who had destroyed Athens generations before. Alexandros said, "Shall we set him up again?" Then he went on, leaving Xerxes where he lay. When he received the satrap of Persia the next day, he seated himself with ceremony on the throne of Artaxerxes, which had been used by the last 2XIIIA. So the third? Because I thought there was three, wasn't it? We're talking about two at this point, I think. Some of the veteran Macedonians wept with relief and joy, perhaps with the fumes of wine still strong in them. One, Demarath, the Corinthian, an old man, wiped away his tears, muttering that he grieved for all the Macedonians and Greeks who had died before they could see their commander on the throne of Persia. To such veterans, this was the end of the war and the unceasing marching. The tradition persists that Alexandros of Macedon burned Persepolis. If you travel through Iran today, you will hear that tradition. Authorities repeat it, and by repetition, it has come to be the single circumstance universally connected with his life. But it is dangerous to assume that whatever happened in Alexandros' presence happened because of his presence. We can kind of say the same thing with the Nazis. As the Nazis, there's reason to think that half the killing done in World War II that's attributed to the German party was just something they didn't stop. But then again, you can blame them for that. So the Macedonian troops. Blame the Macedonian troops. Well, the Macedonian troops who would have done it. Either way. If Alexandros ordered Persepolis palaces to be burned, why did he order it? Certainly he did nothing of the kind at Babylon or Susa, or later at Ecbatana, although he did order such destruction still later, and still further to the east, especially in what is now Turkestan and India. The Greek, and in consequence the Roman narrators, give many versions of this burning. The Romantic version, featuring Thais, is well given by that able writer Plutarch, who was more interested in the working of human souls than in the account of battles. Before taking the road again to go after Dariathoush, Plutarch relates, Alexandros entertained his officers at drinking, even allowing everyone's mistress to sit by him. The most celebrated of these was Thais, an Athenian mistress of Ptolemy, who was afterward king of Egypt. At this feast she spoke up daringly, although, excusably, being an Athenian. She said it was some compensation for her toils in following the army over Asia, to sit here, drinking in the palace of the Persian kings, but it would be much more fun if she could take a torch and set fire to the hall of Xerxes, who had burned Athens in his time. Everyone applauded this whim of hers. The king put a garland on his head and took a torch in his hand. So he led them around the hall while they danced and sang and set fire to the hangings. When the Macedonians outside saw what was doing, they also ran in with torches. They did so with huge delight, for they saw in this destruction a sign that the king had no desire to stay among these barbarians and was inclined to go home. This scene fascinated poets and playwrights for centuries, yet it is not probable that Thais, if she was ever present at Persepolis, had made the march with Alexandros' column over the heights, and if Alexandros destroyed a palace to please her, he never did the like again in his career. Other explanations, rationalizing after the event, have it that he wished to avenge the destruction in Greece more than a century before, that he burned Persepolis, for the moral effect on the Asiatics are to emphasize that the old Persian dynasty was gone and that the Asiatics were dealing with a new king. Arrian has Parmenio argue that it would be a mistake to burn Persepolis if Alexandros planned to remain inland in Asia, yet Parmenio is known to have favored, with his faction of staff, occupation of the western coast rather than the inland region. And don't take revenge against those except who have done the wrong. It's not revenge to kill someone's family or go after someone's descendants or oh, this happened in this country 600 years ago, like a particular incident. A bunch of people who had nothing to do with it wouldn't support such actions, but against this, there are clear indications that the Epidena of Xerxes burned in the confusion after the inrush of the Macedonians. The fire destroyed much of the gold and silver ornamentation of this hall, and apparently Alexandros or his officers ordered it put out. At any rate, it destroyed only the central portion of the palaces, not all the palace height. And certainly later on, Alexandros took pains to seal up and preserve intact the tomb of Cyrus not far away, Kurash as he was called. In all probability, the fire started accidentally and was put out as soon as possible. The Macedonians rested at Persepolis for a month or two, until winter ended and snow cleared from the roads over the passes around them. In this time, Parmenio's slower-moving column came in, and supplies were got from the countryside. They could afford to take this time to rest, because they heard that Dariavaush was pretty well snowed in among the mountains of the Medes, and that he was having trouble assembling a fourth army. To the Macedonians in the ranks, this seemed to be no more than a necessary pause before the last move at the end of the campaign. The wealth taken in at Persepolis staggered their imagination. Enlarged through their concepts had been after listing the spoil of Susa. On the charts of the military surveyors, something equally amazing showed. In the last 10 months, the army had passed through or around a huge area, some 360,000 square miles. To this immense space in the east, of course, were added the territories taken over earlier, the Ionian coast, the islands, Egypt, Libya. A dozen Macedons could be fitted inside these new additions. The surveyors were no longer certain of their exact position on the earth. They had no familiar landmarks to work from. Already they were making corrections in the world plan of Hecataus. Those officers, like Ptolemy, son of Lacus, who still kept connected journals, had similar worries. The army controlled this new area because it confiscated the public wealth, arranged for tribute to be paid, policed the roads, garrisoned the great cities, and trading points. It had assumed responsibility for what? Already the mere task of administration overtaxed the staff, experienced as it was. Insensibly, the body of the army had grown. Women who had been ordered to remain at Babylon appeared mysteriously again out of the baggage trains. The popular actor, Thessalus, turned up again, and again gave performances on the moonlit hillside above Persepolis. The contingents of servants increased. Wrestlers, musicians, and even the beloved roots of the wine grapes somehow made the journey after the army. The Macedonian farmers hurried to get the roots into the ground while it was still cold and wet. No one person had ordered all this. It simply happened. At Persepolis, as at Memphis, The army, it seemed, had tangible appendages that could not be severed from it. Only now these appendages had grown. Money, for instance, the soldiers disliked leaving it behind, no matter how safely it might be stored in their names.